muna. Entrepreneur farmer din kami dyan. So, pag sa December, first harvest, wala kang problema kasi kahit mahal yung strawberry, nabibili. Kasi konti lang yung harvest. Pero ngayon, dumami na yung nagtatanim ng strawberries. So, kailangan namin ng outlet. So, saan ko yun i-market? So, yun yung unang problema ko.
Well, as a farmer, before, we are a conventional farmer. Then here comes the technology on organic agriculture, as well as the promotion of good agricultural practices. That's why we embrace the technology, and we are looking for a market. And it so happened that last year, we were able to meet Ma'am Eloisa from Session Groceries.
Session Groceries is an mobile app na nagko-connect between yung farmer papunta dun sa consumer. So yung mga consumer pwedeng bumili directly dun sa using our mobile app kasi di-deliver sa bahay nila. Hindi namin siya naiisip as business opportunity. Naisip namin siya dati na parang, uy, pwede talaga tayo palang makatulong itong dun sa Manila. Tapos dun ko naisip, may mas malalim pa na problema yung mga magsasaka. Kaya nagtuloy-tuloy kami, nag-start lang lahat yan through social media and digital platform. Since ang alam namin is itong mga farmers, alam nila kung paano magtanim, pero wala silang market. Pero wala din silang alam sa business side. So, binigay namin yung dalawa, bigyan natin sila ng additional market, tapos bigyan din natin sila ng knowledge.
So, nagkakandak ng Session Groceries ng monthly na seminar. Nakakatulong sila sa marketing namin. Kailangang i-value mo kasi yung hirap mo. We should not work hard. We should work wise. Marang ganun.
Hanggang sa dumating yung mga Session Groceries, siyempre masaya kami kasi may sarili kaming market. Tapos, nandiyan kami sa hindi kami malugi.
Sa gusto kong hindi mawala yung aming naipon, we were able to purchase a lot, 1.2 hectare. I'm proud to see na that is our saving from the Session Groceries.
Ang social media kasi malaking bagay talaga siya to reach out. Like before, kailangan magpa-advertise ka, kailangan marami kang pera para makapagpa-advertise. Ngayon, ang kailangan mo na lang is sabihin mo talaga yung totoong nangyayari sa'yo, yung totoong kailangan mo. Yung post na yun, umabot siya sa iba't ibang lugar. Kaya nagkaroon from 4 orders, papunta ng Manila, it increased to 7, and then hanggang sa dumami ng dumami. Marami kaming supporters. Sa totoo na hindi namin kilala. Kahit yung mga magsasaka, na-amaze din sila. Yun nga yung goal ko for mga magsasaka is, in the next 100 years, kailangan mapakain ng mga magsasakang Pilipino, ang bawat Pilipino. For the consumers, ang gusto ko kasi mangyari is, hindi bibili ang consumer kasi naaawa sila sa mga magsasaka. Bumibili sila kasi quality naman yung products na pinoproduce ng mga magsasakang Pilipino.
Sa akin, it runs with the blood na yung pagiging farmer. So, nakapag-aral ako dahil sa farming. So, mahirap din ang farming pero when you have the heart na mag-farm, tsaga-tsaga lang, darating din tayo dyan. So hopefully yung dream ni Ma'am Eloisa, tsaga-tsaga lang.
There was this horse that I started riding when I was around 11 years old. His name was Viper. I had lost something when Viper died because he changed me as a rider. And my little sister, she's a lot younger than me. I didn't want to see her lose interest in riding also. So I had lost something in me that made me want to do it just for myself. As my mentor and my coach, Gina and I got quite close over the years, and she's really great. She knows horses in general so well. I can really let my guard down around her, and that lets her see my shortcomings more than other people. Also, you can see it in the way we treat the horses. I think we have a very similar approach. I feel safer knowing that there's someone who understands me in that way without having to talk about it.
Para sa akin, yung relasyon na i-develop, parang kapatid ko na siya eh. Sabi ko, malambot rin pala puso nito. Hindi rin kayang yung kabayo. Parang ako lang din pala. Yung alam ko na training pala talaga dapat niya is yung sasakay lang sa kabayo, kung tama ba yung ginagawa niya. Pero ginawa ko pang mas naging advanced yung ginawa ko sa kanya. If in case na makawala yung kabayo, share ko na sa kanya kung paano yung though alam ko kasi magaling naman si Sol, masunurin na rider ito. Oo.
I think that's what applying for the Mongol Derby was I was looking for a way to kind of reignite that feeling that I had lost before, to reconnect with that part of me. I found out about it through social media and stumbled upon the Mongol Derby Instagram account. The Mongol Derby, so it's the longest and supposedly toughest horse race in the world. When I found out that my application passed the first round, that's when all the better reasons for doing it came in. And it was just amazing that just by telling a few people, so much help came in right away. I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. There was this bigger narrative going on because other people who are riding in the Derby from Singapore, from the United States, from Australia, when they started seeing me on social media, I've gotten messages from them that they're amazed by the work that the Pony Boys do, and now they want to come here and visit and ride with them. That's another thing about training with Gina and training with the Pony Boys is that I realized it made me appreciate them so much more. Their idea of helping me with training was like, okay, let's turn her into one of us. Teaching me how to use the lasso to catch a wild horse, making me ride Rain. He's a semi-wild horse that we caught about a month ago. It's just amazing. They've been so supportive.
Tingin ko sa kanya talagang sabi ko, go ka lang, be positive sa lahat ng anong gagawin mo. Kapag nandun ka man, nandun man ako wala, positive ka pa rin. Nandiyan ka na, gawin mo na ang lahat ng makakaya mo.
You know, sometimes I feel like I have a second family away from home. And that's been such a great help to me. Like, that really makes me feel like I can go to Mongolia, and if I finish it, and if I finish it well, like, it'll be something that I can be proud of again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grid Open Call presented by Grid Magazine and Eastern Communications. I am Executive Editor and photographer Paco Guerrero, I'd like to thank you for spending some of your Saturday evening with us today. For those unfamiliar with Grid, we are a magazine for travelers, by travelers, exclusively telling stories from around the Philippines. You can check out some of our work at www.gridmagazine.ph. Now, we hold a recurring event called the Grid Open Call, where we invite photographers from around the country to show their work in one-on-one portfolio reviews. It's important to our process as we believe that working closely with photographers and understanding their style is essential to what creates a good story. But this year, in many ways, has thrown us all for a loop. Our stories are changing, as is the way we create them. Shoots are limited and assignments are sparse. Despite that, of course, we are still photographers, and today we want to create a space to talk, to check in and review how the landscape of visual storytelling is changing in our country. More importantly, we want to know how photographers like ourselves, like yourselves, our audience, are doing. So we'll be dedicating most of our time to answering your questions. So drop any you might have in the comments section below. Now, on to our guests. Joining me today, and I'm very excited that they're joining me today, are three very talented local photographers. Eloisa Lopez, Joseph Pasquale, and Gio Panlilio. Let's have everyone do a quick intro. Let's start with you, Eloisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Eloisa. I'm a photographer based in Manila. I'm currently a visual journalist for Reuters. Reuters, an international news agency where my main job is basically to photograph news and produce multimedia stories around the Philippines and, if possible, around the world.
That's good. Yes, when we can travel, definitely around the world, Eloisa. Our next guest who's kindly joining us today is Gio Panlillo. Gio, quick intro.
Hi, I'm Gio. Apart from being a photographer, I'm also the photo editor and co-founder of Tarzio Pictures. We're a small photo gallery here in Manila, and we work with a lot of local photographers to help edit, develop, and also show their projects. And we also do short form documentaries and some short films.
Nice. And finally, our guest, who I just discovered actually also shoots weddings. I know him from his work in Esquire, Joseph Pasquale. Joseph, are you there? All right. Joseph Pasquale might have stepped out to shoot a wedding just now. Let's give it a second. There he is. Joseph, I was just saying, I recently found out that you shoot weddings in a very beautiful and spectacular way. Can you give us your intro?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joseph Pasquale. I'm a portrait photographer. I've contributed to local publications like Grid Magazine, Rogue Magazine, Esquire, and CNN Philippines. And I also sometimes do commercial work for a few local and international companies as well.
Right. All your intros were sadly incredibly too humble, but we're going to talk a little bit more. You're going to show off your work to everybody who's watching. So let's start. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, COVID-19. This question is going to go to Eloisa because I think you're going to have a very good insight into these past few months. You've been doing very important work documenting the effects of the pandemic in the Philippines. What has it been like as a photojournalist for Reuters during these past few months?
It's been overwhelming, to say the least. Limited access has definitely been my biggest challenge, and I think most photographers, if not all, would agree to that. The pandemic literally changed the way we work, from having to wear PPE all the time to having to disinfect our equipment almost any chance we get, not being allowed inside places where we're normally allowed to, and having to distance ourselves from people when usually we'd be the one approaching people, introducing ourselves. You know, everyone's a little more distant now. Everyone's a little more scared or shy to talk. And that really takes away something from my process of storytelling, which is to connect, to get to know people. And actually, even just the mere fact of wearing a mask, it's really taken something from me, which is, you know, sometimes all I need to get people's consent to photograph them is a smile or a nod. And with all of us masks, sometimes I don't know if they're still smiling or if they like that I'm photographing them. So yeah, it's been a little more difficult to approach people now and to photograph, but I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying. And of course, personally, on top of all that, there's also the mental and emotional toll of this whole pandemic, thinking about whether or not I'm getting infected with whatever I'm doing, constantly having to question everything. Is this too risky? Is this safe? Is this worth it? But yeah, the only way I've been trying to go through it is to just take it day by day, because there's really no other way to work through this than that. Otherwise, I would go insane thinking about the future.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of pressure, especially on the news gatherers like yourself, Eloise, and you were saying that there are a lot of barriers, physical barriers of not being able to go, physical barrier of masks. You mentioned also that you limit your time in a certain place as much as possible to limit exposure for yourself and your subjects. But and yet we're looking at an image now of these kids who look like they're about to start school, and we've seen images of daily life around the films. You're still able to capture a certain amount of intimacy in your images. How are you able to do that when everybody's got a mask on? That's my question.
So these days, I try to connect with my subjects or anyone I'm photographing or the story I'm doing through online first, or I don't know, through phone or anywhere else, but personally, so that I could try to break the ice even before we meet. You know, usually I would really try to spend time with them, like get to know them first before start photographing. But now I don't have that luxury, and I don't think it's also safe to do that, and it's not right to do that now. So yeah, I try to break the ice digitally online, and then that when I think I've gotten enough to photograph them, to know about their story before visiting them, that's when I just go to either their house or where they work in, and then yeah, that's when I start photographing. And I think everyone has that shared understanding that we all have these limitations. So I think once they've given me the consent, they're also willing to just let me in, because they know that I also can't stay too much, or that I'm also trying to distance myself, and they're also trying to be careful, of course. So yeah, I think it's a shared understanding between me and the people I photograph already. So all I really need these days is just that yes, that okay, it's okay to photograph us.
One other thing is that you're able to get access to certain areas. For example, the COVID swab testing facilities, the Rizal Memorial for the locally the ones who were trapped from the travel ban. We're so used to news coming from citizen journalists these days, where everybody's got a camera, everybody's shooting. So from an event, you'll have maybe 50 or 60 photographers in the field. But now with COVID, the role of the photojournalist is even more important, because you guys are the only ones who are going to be able to get access to these places where these events are so important. Does that add a burden to your coverage, or do you find it is it easier since you're not competing with 50 other people with their phones out?
I wouldn't say it's a burden. I think it's a privilege actually now to be able to document this really historical thing that's happening around the world. I don't think would ever experience this again. Hopefully not again.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, please.
So I do think it's a privilege to be able to have the outlet and the resources to photograph and document whatever's happening around our communities and the whole country. It's a little easier now that there's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of competition, but actually lately that hasn't been what's happening. The past coverages I've been, a lot of photographers are popping up again. So yeah, it's sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not. It depends on what I'm covering, but yeah, I think it's really important what we're doing now, and anytime I can photograph something that's newsworthy, I try to be there as quick as I can, photograph whatever I can as much as I can, and just get out of there as soon as I can.
True. All right, I'm gonna switch over here to Gio, because Gio's been doing a very interesting body of work, but the complete opposite of yours, Eloisa. Gio's been doing work trapped in your apartment, right?
Yeah.
So Gio, tell us a little bit about what the images that we're gonna see come up on screen. Tell us a little bit about this work.
Well, I guess for me, unlike Eloy says, a lot of my work is based in personal work and in making personal projects, and so it really comes from a place of I have to find reasons to go out there, I have to find reasons to get images, and with all of the risks in the pandemic, and I also alone they're risky. I just kind of figured it's not worth it for me to make images right now. And it's not worth it for me to be out there in case I'm bringing stuff in or bringing stuff out. I mean, that would be the last thing I want. So it's really forced me to confront my motivations behind why I like taking images. And so I've decided to kind of put all that stuff on hold, and still I felt this urge to photograph, and being at home, the only view out really is through my window. And so there are these images that I made over the last 6 months, just really observing outside my window, kind of seeing how life has been out there, if there are people out there. A lot of them are of people on the rooftops, and I guess it was quite interesting to see people that were doing activities that would be normally done on the street, such as walking their dog, or in a public place like working out. All of a sudden they're confined to do it in isolation from the rooftops. And so there was those images from the rooftops, and on the previous slide, there were I had a long lens and was photographing people who were walking the streets from afar. And even with a super long lens, they were still extremely small in my frame, and I cropped just to get them, the full body. And for me, it really accentuated the distance, and I think Eloisa was talking about it, that you lose that sense of intimacy with the subjects, the people that you're photographing, and the situations that you're in. And even cropping them on a long lens kind of gave this very grainy effect, and it almost felt to me as if they were kind of disappearing into the background. So I guess for me it's been work about distance more than anything else. And some of these collages I did all of them digitally. I one day hope to print them out and maybe try to do it in hand, but I noticed kind of doing it digitally that it felt kind of like a surveillance camera in a way, and it kind of made me feel like James Stewart from Rear Window, where I'm just kind of observing and being a voyeur and watching people kind of go about their business. And on some level, it also allowed me to be more experimental with how I make these compositions, because some of these people are not where they are on the image, but I just played around kind of putting them in places and kind of accentuating, there's a narrative there, or there's an idea there. And so, yeah.
I love both sets of images from your Rear Window. But these collages, I'm quite excited to see printed big, because it also reflects that idea that you're saying, that since each person is almost its own image, that idea of isolation is magnified, right? Isolation within such a vast space. Speaking of isolation and that urge to photograph, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, especially in our field. We're not able to go out, not able to shoot. How have you been able to push through that and create this, well, for me, amazing body of work?
Um, well, going back to what I said in the start, I guess for me, a lot of my work is self motivated. It's not like Eloisa, where it's her job. It's this kind of duty to tell these stories of these people. And for me, I guess I accepted the fact that there's a limitation really to what the images I can take can do. They're a bit more outside of reality and a bit distant in a sense. So I guess I just told myself that it was okay not to take images throughout this period, and it was okay not to be pressured to make anything new. And I felt that way also because I saw the work that people like Eloisa were doing and other photographers, and I was, I really trusted their work and their vision to convey, the stories that are on the ground. So I was okay. I guess I decided that I wasn't pressuring myself to make work. Like I think I have 6 collages here, and there were 6 months in quarantine. So it ended up being about a collage a month, really. So I just would observe, and if there was something there, I would photograph it. If there was nothing there, then I wouldn't photograph anything.
Nice. So we're gonna. It seems like Eloisa is the one who's having to go out into the field, camera in hand, and capture events as they happen. And your approach, Gio, has been quite the opposite. That rear window effect. You're behind glass. People don't know they're being photographed. Mm-hmm. You have no interaction. We're gonna go to Joseph Pasquale now, who's done something a little bit in between, where he does interact with his subjects, but on a Zoom call. But before that, I want to ask Joseph why you call yourself a career photographer. What does that mean?
Well, I guess I call myself a career photographer because I work best when I'm given an assignment. It kind of is. There are similarities between me and Eloisa and Gio, I guess. With Eloisa, there are assignments that she has to do. She goes out into the field and she has a story to tell. For Gio naman, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. And for me, I guess my creativity starts after someone tells me something that they want me to do for them. So instead of a lot of personal work, we will be talking about basically my first personal project ever. But before all of that, I would really just wait for an assignment and see what sort of exchange I would have with the client or with the publication after finding out about it.
And Joseph, when you say publication, I mean, I first came to know of your work when there were still print magazines around called Esquire and Rogue. Thank goodness Grid is still around. But so you're saying that the creative directors, the art directors, or the editor-in-chief would hand you an assignment, right? And then you'd interpret it?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think now that you're talking about the team involved with coming up with a shoot, I remember that that old European folktale called Stone Soup, where the village suddenly comes together and makes soup out of what started was a boiling pot of water. Like they suddenly all had something to add to it, and that's what I feel like my work specifically is. Because the second one person comes in and contributes an idea, then the whole thing starts to grow. So really, I believe that my best work is never really just mine. It's built on the prompts, the feedback, the original ideas of an entire team, which I actually love.
Of which you have very little access to right now, I guess.
Not right now.
But the images we're seeing on screen is some of your work pre-lockdown, right? This is sort of your street work. But let me ask you about your project with Buzzcuts. Tell us a little bit about this first personal project you've ever done.
Well, it started about maybe a month into lockdown. When we were entering April, that's when I began to realize that this event that was happening was really going to be a more long-term thing. And that's when I finally cut my hair, because usually I don't look like this. And that's when I realized, what about everyone else? Everyone else is forced to stay home. And one of the first things that people remember that they have to do is like just groom themselves, take care of
Right.
themselves in whatever physical way possible. So I wanted to see how this would manifest, I guess. Would people let their hair grow? Would people cut it off completely? And this series started after I put out an open call and asked people, like, do you look extra different right now? And with the replies that I got, like, yeah, that was basically it. I reached out to them and we scheduled Zoom calls, and I just took these photos through Zoom. So what you
So
see here is, go ahead, sorry.
you'd get on a Zoom call, and then would you compose the image and direct them a little bit as far as the lighting, the composition?
Yeah, that's the fun part actually. What we would do was we would basically have our laptops like this, and we just be like moving it all around until we get the right shot. And then after that, I just pose them very, very slowly. It was like, move a bit of yourself this way, move your shoulder down, turn away from me. And the best part about it was seeing that there was just so much, I guess, trust, but also this was so unfamiliar for all of us. This process, at least, of doing photos through Zoom. Usually, I think my favorite part about photography is that you're face to face with someone, that the interaction is instant, that you can see them, that you can talk to them, and so much of that is lost right now. But with this project, I think there was a tiny, tiny bit of a connection that became even more precious right now. There were delays in the internet connection. Sometimes it takes time to communicate what you want and how the person sees themselves as. But when the image finally comes together and they see it themselves, because I share these with them as well. When everyone sees what's been done, there's this little, I don't know, like shiver of pleasure, at least for me, seeing that this is still possible now. And like this project is halfway through. Right now, what we're doing is I've finished doing the Zoom calls, but in 1 or 2 years, when things have quote unquote normalized or hopefully gotten better than where we were previously, I'll be revisiting these subjects in their homes this time and taking these photos with my camera, recreating them in better times.
I'm really looking forward to seeing those images. And one of the things that struck me most about this set of images is that almost nobody's facing the camera, right? And it's such an unnatural thing to be on a Zoom call and not see the face. I mean, this our crop right now is the standard. I'm really getting bored of this Zoom composition, dead center,
Yeah.
shoulder height. It's getting visually very. I'm gonna sit on the
Yeah,
third.
we could
Can you direct
just
us?
like do something.
Joseph.
No, I haven't had enough practice, but I'm gonna obey the rule of thirds instead of the dead center. Speaking of following instructions online, grid photographer Miguel Nascenceno is lurking. Are we saying lurking? I don't. Well, he's in the comments section on the Facebook. So if you have any questions, he'll answer you. He's a really funny guy. So I'm not going to be able to read the questions or the answers right now, but have fun with Miguel. He's got to say, especially with cycling. Anything that's on a bike, he'll be able to tell you. All right. We said this would be a discussion, so I don't want to sit here and ask all the questions. Do you guys have any questions that you want to ask each other? You want to ask us, or I guess me? Go ahead. It's a 5-minute free for all, as the director says.
I have a question for Joseph, actually, about his buzz cut project. Are there any things about shooting people on Zoom that you actually? It's hard to say prefer. I don't want to say prefer, but you actually were, you enjoyed, I guess, over doing it in person, maybe. Or was it just like a miserable experience?
Well, it definitely wasn't miserable. The only thing miserable The only thing miserable about it is the image resolution. But besides that, everything else was great. I think it's like you're still exercising, but it's a completely different exercise. It's like switching from running to weightlifting, I guess. So you're still using this this mental process that you know, which is taking photos. But because of the change in the situation, it's like you're using something that you're very familiar with in a completely different way. I found it very stimulating, actually, Gio. It was very challenging, of course, and there's a lot of things that I think are lost in the technical aspect. But what is gained instead, and my favorite part was seeing that it was so it was more collaborative than the usual kind of shoot, because even for the subjects, they knew that this was different. Not that the shoot was, at least for me, like not that it's going to change the world, of course, but just being together in a very new medium. Because back in April, like we were just getting to know what Zoom even was. But well, now we know it. But yeah, that's
Adobe. Just a reminder before I know you guys have questions for each other. We also want to hear questions from you, the audience, the viewers, people who are out there. So put them on the Facebook comments, and we will gather them together. And then the second half of this will be the audience questions, hopefully being answered. Follow us on Instagram, because there we also did a call out. So if you had questions for us on Instagram, the producers will be popping them up on the second half of the show. Now back to these guys. Any more questions for each other?
I have a question for you,
Joseph.
Paco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How is Grid doing in the midst of all of this? Because you're a travel magazine and it's all about stories all around the country. How did you, number one, congrats on getting through the past few months, but how did you do it?
We still don't know how it all happened, but there's one thing I'm sure of, is that the team at Grid have been just brilliant this whole time, and it's been a very challenging time. Like many other companies, we had to furlough the staff for a little bit, so we were on hold. But as it happened, before the lockdown, we had completed photography, filming, and most of the travel required to come out with issue number 9, which is 24 hours in the Philippines, 1 day in the Philippines. So we had to put that on hold, and we had to think long and hard whether printing a travel magazine is something that is not tone deaf. You know, we didn't want to go out there and say, hey, look at these great beaches and stuff, especially in March and in April, when there was just so much unknown. But the team got together, and the team decided that, you know what, we've never been about bikinis and beaches only. And the stories we had in the bank from issue number 9 were actually about things that were even more important. It was about farmers in Baguio who are now, through an app, selling directly to us Manileños here, enjoying their vegetables. It was about the dreams of a horse rider who wants to go to Mongolia one day. All of a sudden, on our lap was a perfect story about the Philippines, about so many locations around the Philippines. I think it's gonna be tough. We are now at a point where the tourism destinations are opening up. I think the DOT is leading the charge. There are a lot of businesses relying on travelers, and one good thing, and I'll keep this as short as possible, is that finally domestic travel is in the conversation. Because for the longest time, the numbers we were concerned about was foreign travelers, always from the US, from Europe, from China, from wherever it might be. It was always foreign. Yet now I think we realize two things: that domestic travel is something the Filipinos can use as a developmental tool. I read somewhere that tourism has been the largest voluntary exchange of money from the rich areas to the poorer areas. So what I'm saying is that that small Bahay Kubo or Banquero or that small resort in a very isolated beach or island community, that's economic development that we as travelers can help with. And I think now more than ever, we need to do that for our own fellow countrymen.
I love that.
That's my answer, I think. Any other questions? Last one, I think we have time for just one last question from you guys. Eloisa, do you have a question? You haven't thrown one yet.
Has anyone started a new hobby this pandemic?
Oh, I think that's a whole separate broadcast.
It is.
That's another 3 hours, I think.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
What
One
have you
episode
picked
for
up?
each hobby.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing to answer Eloisa, one thing you've all picked up, a new thing you've picked up during this this lockdown. Starting with you, Eloisa, since you asked the question.
I'm trying to make a macrame, like knotting. Yeah,
Wow.
for my plants. I wanted to do it for my plants. Everything is for my plants these days.
All right, Gio, what one thing you've picked up during this?
I
Lockdown.
started making my own coffee, like brewing my own coffee in the morning.
Wow.
I've loved drinking coffee, but I've always used like the instant espresso pods before, which is wrong on many levels. But I finally saw the light, I guess. So I started doing that.
Congratulations.
As long as you're drinking coffee. Joseph Pasquale, tell me you're not using instant coffee.
Unfortunately, this is Nespresso.
Oops.
So oops talaga. My hobby was I added ice cubes to it. That's really all I can say.
Iced
My
coffee.
new hobbies here.
That's good. That's good.
And you, Paco?
Oh,
What about you, Paco?
sourdough. I'm afraid I started doing sourdough, and I have imposed my baking to many unsuspecting family and hopefully still friends after they received this attempt at being a baker. Well, we're gonna wrap this bit up, and I think we're gonna be moving on soon to the IG question. I'd just like to remind everybody that this broadcast is possible thanks to our partners at Eastern Communications, who've been fantastic at supporting the way we tell stories about the Philippines. So if you can, check them out, Eastern Communications. So here is the first question. And the first question is for Joseph. From What's Abby Eating? I wonder if this is make food. How do you capture the most authentic emotions from your subjects? And I know authentic is a bit problematic.
That is right, Paco. I find the word authentic. I find the word authentic very interesting as well, because I think it says more about what the person, what the viewer, what the consumer wants to feel from what they're consuming. So I feel like they want something that they understand, that's a little bit different, but still familiar and within their values. And that last part, being within their values, I think that's something that is what authenticity is. There's so many layers, of course, but I just want to focus on that part. I think values kind of like reveal people's intentions. So in my case, when I take photos, my intention is always to honor either the story or the subject, ideally both. That doesn't always happen though. Sometimes the story or the subject gets a bit like left behind for a greater purpose. And that's really up to me to decide. But let's go back to authentic though. I feel like that's an interesting question to ask both Gio and Eloisa as well, because in Gio's case, it's all about the authenticity of what's driving him, whatever he sees outside his window, and how he creates like a new sort of like visual story from that. And with Eloisa, the thing is, I can't comment on that because photojournalism is so different from portraiture. It has its own, ethical rules as well. So I guess it's something we can all ask ourselves.
That's true. The word authentic always is a bit of a loaded word, I think. But we have another question here for Gio. Oh, how do you think photography? This is another loaded one. Sorry, Gio. How do you think photography can influence people to take action, or even just influence people? Might be a better question.
I'm glad we had the rehearsal because I was able to think about this for a week. But
yes, everybody, we did rehearse this, but these answers are off the cuff.
It's a tough question to answer. I guess you kind of have to think about what action is, and the different ways that people take action. I guess the first thing you think of is social action, maybe. How photography can make people act in a social context. And then maybe you can think about action as from a more commercial standpoint. If you see like LeBron James wearing a pair of shoes or drinking a drink, do people take action and purchase those products because of those images that they see? And I guess lastly now, the most direct way is on social media. Even something as simple as taking action to like an image on Instagram or taking action to comment on an image on Instagram. I guess that can also be considered actions still. So it's difficult. I guess I was thinking about it, and it's hard to say how photos and images can resonate with people and what people can pick up on in certain images that speak to them, and I think ultimately the strength of photography is that it also doesn't need language. It doesn't have a language barrier to communicate an idea or a feeling or a story, but it's a visual medium, so people can see. So yeah, I guess to answer the question, it's difficult to really say how photography can resonate with people, but if you've seen a photograph that you really resonate with, then you kind of have that feeling where it does something to you. There's something very truthful about it, and very direct that I think is very special about it.
We're dealing with big words here, Gio. Authentic, truthful.
Yeah.
So this is
truthful is another difficult one.
Yeah, I see Eloisa raising her eyebrow a little bit. This will go for the whole panel, I think. And the question is from Pierre Sipagan, who's watching on FB. This is a tough one. Let's see if, Eloisa, you can tackle this one. What are your thoughts on the overall visual narrative of the pandemic in both the commercial, the art world, and I'm going to add the news?
Yeah, I can't speak for the other two, but I think I can try to speak for what's happening in news photography. Definitely a lot of photos the past months has been very similar, actually, because we're all going through this universal experience. Like, I feel like everyone around the world, in one way or another, is affected by this pandemic. And actually, the way I've been trying to, especially now that we're already like 6 months into it, to highlight the Filipino experience of the pandemic is to try to photograph something that's unique to us, or something that's only happening in the Philippines, or at least happening in very few places. For example, I tried to photograph how the lockdown looks like in slum areas, because the past few months we're seeing all these pictures from the US and Europe of kids riding their horses inside their homes, or like homeschooling with like big TVs, or like triathletes making their own gyms inside their houses. And that's definitely definitely what lockdown is like for a lot of Filipinos. So yeah, I think it's about just trying to tell this story that's unique to wherever you are. And yeah, I think that's how photographers around the world are trying to make it different. Otherwise, it's all the same. Especially with all of us masks, pictures really do look the same. So yeah, it's really all about trying to photograph something that's different, a story that's very unique, or yeah, something that's just in your place or in your country. I hope that
Very
makes sense.
something that's very Filipino.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a picture of someone roasting lechon, but with full PPE. Very interesting. That seems to be all the
Coming up
stereotypes
on
in one thing,
Christmas.
right? There you go. Yes, paroles with PPE. I hope by then you won't need it. But well, we're gonna take a quick break before we answer more of your questions. Again, this is a Grid open call. Dialogues, just dialogues, no pressure, co-presented by Eastern Communications. Send us your questions and we'll do our best to get through them over the next half hour. We'll be back after this quick break.
That was quick.
Ora Chocolate is a proudly Filipino bean to bar.
We seem to have technical difficulties on the break. That wasn't a 5-second break. I think it'll play now. And this one's about chocolate, so watch it. It's super interesting.
Ora Chocolate is a proudly Filipino bean to bar chocolate company. We sustainably source cacao beans directly from farmers in Davao. So currently we actually work with around 2,000 to 3,000 hectares of farmland. And what our goal is really to empower farming communities, teach them how to treat their farms as a business. We work with different hotels, restaurants, supermarkets, etc. within the country. We also actually opened our first ever retail store in Shibuya in Tokyo. And we have plans to expand in different countries as well. The Philippines has actually had cacao for over 300 years. And it's something that we've developed and are the only country in Asia to have a culture surrounded in drinking chocolate. What's really interesting is that whenever we introduce our products to different people around the world, we then see that people are really surprised that first of all, the Philippines has cacao, let alone a country that also produces its own chocolate. Every 2 years, there's a competition that's held in Paris. It is a competition for the best cacao beans in the world. So last year, we actually decided to enter a few of our farming partners. Jose Saguban is a farmer in Davao, specifically in Paquibato. He's been growing cacao all his life, and so he really stuck true to the varieties that he had and continued to nurture them over time. So it was really important for Mang Jose to actually go to Paris because he represents like the everyday farmer, somebody that doesn't really get the recognition that he deserves. And so this was a very powerful statement for him and his community. We decided to take the necessary steps to actually have him go to Paris himself and receive the award personally. So from the time when we found out that he had won the top 50 best cacao beans in the world, what we didn't actually realize was that he had also won the top 20 best cacao beans in the world. The Philippines then is a representative for the whole Asia Pacific. This is such a huge thing for us and the Philippines as well. In an effort to bring awareness for cacao and chocolate in the Philippines to the rest of the world, we try to do a lot of talks online. And so, of course, with the current situation, online is now one of the main sources of information and bringing people together. Social media plays a huge role in our overall interaction with our community. When people are able to see our brand, they then start to gain interest and see where they can taste it or if they can try it or purchase it somewhere. I think the Philippines is actually at a turning point because right now we're seeing so many creative ideas, so many new brands that are made locally. There's a whole movement about supporting local. And so I think that that's something that's really important for us because I think it's a sign of Filipino revival because it really kind of embodies our culture more. And it also highlights who we are as a community and who we are as a people. And And so I think something that we do in regards to making our own local products and highlighting cacao and chocolate making in the Philippines is really paying homage to our heritage, something that has been here for 300 years, something that we can now actually produce and turn it into chocolate. I think it's important to really pay tribute to the rich cultural heritage that we have and really showcase that to the rest of the world.
And we are back. I told you it was about chocolate. I told you it was good. The oral stories is really nice. This series of videos, actually, you're seeing, if I may break from the script really quickly, are part of what we've done with Eastern Communications for issue 9. Again, talking about farmers, talking about horseback riding, but all how we've all turned to connectivity to try and make these things happen. And it's been an interesting thing to see them grow their businesses and grow their connections throughout the lockdown. Right. Good. Here we go. By the way, you can watch the 3-part series on our website, gridmagazine.com, or here on the Facebook page. But more than anything, I'm excited to say that joining us is Grid photo editor, Mr. Sonny Thakur. Sonny's also going to talk to us about the other side of Open Call, the portfolio reviews.
Thanks, Paco. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonny. I'm the photo editor of Grid Magazine. And I hope you guys have been enjoying so far on the live stream and on the comment section, which is kind of blowing up right now. So some of you might know that the Open Call series is a series where we take in photographers' work and then we share it an esteemed panel of guests. So we're going to do the same this year, slightly different though. We're going to be taking in all your applications online. We're going to flash a link just down below. And yeah, just turn in a bunch of your images. You can host everything on your Instagram, on your Tumblr, on a website. We're going to be opening 20 slots. And after you get confirmation of acceptance, you get to pick who reviews your work. And the 5 of us are going to go through your work.
Well, more than anything, to have someone like Eloisa, someone like Gio, or someone like Joseph or Sonny to be able to take a look at your work on a one-on-one, I think is a very valuable learning experience for any photographer. I still do this. I show my work to Sonny. He rarely looks excited. But do it, because it's a very, very good part of the learning process. And I'd like to thank our guests, Eloisa, Gio, and Joseph, for taking the time to look at some of the young photographers' work who will be making their submissions. Sonny, when is this whole thing taking place?
So we're actually using the link below. We're accepting portfolios, and I think we're gonna cut off Monday night, and we're gonna start reviewing after that.
Okay. All right. Again, all this information I think will be updated and posted on our Facebook and on our Instagram. So get your portfolios ready and submit them. Sonny, you're gonna stick around, right? So it's gonna be a panel of 5. Okay, good. We'll throw you all the tough questions. But for now, we're gonna go to the questions from the audience, and this goes to Eloisa, definitely. And this question is from Mozpen. Eloisa, why do you think there are fewer women in photography versus men?
Yeah, I asked the same question myself. And honestly, it's just a long history of misogyny and sexism. But I think the better question to ask is why there should be more women in photography, especially now. And I think we have to think about the dangers of this gender imbalance in photography, especially in news industry. Because what we photograph, what we see in our lens, our perspective is what the world sees, because it's what comes out in newspapers around the world, or these days online, in Instagram, on every news outlet. And if we only see if the public only sees the male perspective or the male gaze, that's really dangerous because that would be the reality that they would see. For example, the reality of women in the Philippines if only photographs by male photographers are published. And I think that's not fair. That's not fair for photographers, and it's definitely not fair for the people we photograph. That's why I think photographers should also be representative of the people we photograph. Because it's the only way we could capture the nuances of their stories. Otherwise, there's a lot that could be misunderstood, mistranslated from their stories if the photographer doesn't really fully understand their story or what you're trying to say.
Loisa, I know you have very specific examples here, and I guess one of the things we have to talk about too is just the mere idea of access. During your coverage of the drug war, for example, there were just certain spaces that male photographers we're just too, shall we say, our presence is just too violent to that space, right? Could you give me an example of how a female photographer can have better access to be able to tell the important stories that the male colleagues simply don't have?
Yeah, it was really apparent to me how my womanhood was important in storytelling. When I was covering the nightly killings in Manila, when I was doing the night shift, early 2016, 2017, most nights when I would go around communities, for example, to go to a wake, and we would go as a group with my fellow photographers, most of them males. And they would actually ask me to go ahead and introduce myself first to the family, go inside a wake first alone sometimes, and then introduce everyone else for on behalf of everyone. Because their presence, like you said, sometimes look violent, especially with cameras dangling around their shoulders that look like weapons at night. So yeah, that alone, my presence, my physical presence sometimes is what gives family comfort. And I think a little comfort like that is important, especially in sensitive stories. And also I realized that most widows actually are either my age, close to my age, or if not, mothers of victims are like as old as my mom or as old as my grandma. So it's very easy for them to connect to me. It's very easy for them to let me in their houses. So yeah, that was one thing that really I thought was important and powerful in having women photographers in the field more. Because imagine if streets are just filled with male photographers that apparently could be causing more trauma to these people we photograph for that fact alone that their maleness triggers something.
Well, otherwise, I don't think we have to actually imagine too much because maybe as recently as 20 or 30 years ago, the pack of photographers were all men, and usually white Western men traveling around the third world country covering events. And I'm not belittling their work, but that was the reality. And I'm glad to see that's changing. So we're gonna move on to another question. We're gonna go from representation now to ethics. So this question is from Andrew Cadorna, and this is for Joseph. Joseph, what's the one thing that you're not willing to compromise when it comes to your work ethic?
Oh my God. One thing I'm not going to compromise. Wow. What's interesting about this question, thanks Andrew, is that having a work ethic is really about being uncompromising. That is true. But it starts way before.
Oh, I think Joseph has cut out as he spoke about ethics. I'm gonna move on here.
I was so excited to hear what he's gonna say.
Joseph, when you come back, you have to complete your answer. But for now, we're gonna move to another question from Asen Baldevia. And I'm going to throw this to Gio because I think you'd have an interesting perspective on this. The question is, where do you usually publish your photo projects? And do you ever feel tempted to post your work online before finishing a project?
Yeah. Maybe I'll talk about the second question first, and then I'll go back to the
Okay.
first one. Yeah, I always feel tempted to post works online before it's done. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
But that doesn't. I don't think it really affects the finished project when it's done. You know, I think people sometimes get the impression where if you post works online, it somehow takes away from the final product when you're done with it, which I don't think necessarily is true. I know from Tarzier, when we look at work, just because Instagram is a place where there's so many images, we always look there for looking for new photographers. And most of the time we reach out to people based on work that they have on Instagram. And a lot of the time the images there are from projects they're still working on, you know, things that are unfinished, but it gives us a good idea of, you know, what their style is like, what kind of themes they're interested in, the stuff they're working on. And depending on what we're looking for, like the kinds of themes we're attracted to, it gives us a better sense of the photographer and who they are. And so I guess that kind of leads into the first part of the question of where do you usually publish photo projects? And I guess it's a difficult answer. There are a few places, I guess, when I think about it, just off the top of my head, there's, you know, like a gallery and an exhibit. There's a photo book or a zine. And also there are online spaces, you know, whether that's a publication or if it's a news story with a media partner. So there are a couple of avenues, I guess, where you can go to post work, and maybe something to consider when you're working on the project is obviously maybe not at the beginning. Maybe once you have a grasp on what it is you're working on, to kind of imagine where it's going to live at the end. And that's not to say that just because it's a book, it can't be a show, or just because it's a show, it can't be a book, or just because it's a book, it can't be on a website. You know, I think the platforms are quite malleable, and the work can be edited and adjusted based on where you're showing it. And I think that's also something that interests me about photography, is that a lot of the time it's the final project is a work in retrospect. It's easy to come back to a project and rearrange it around, add something, take something away. And it's something that's, for me, it's always evolving. So I guess when you think about where you publish work, you know, it would be helpful to have an idea of where you might initially want to put it, but don't be limited to that one place. I think photos have the ability to live in different spaces.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Joseph for the ethics question that you were about to start answering. Once again, for those, it's not a glitch. We're going back. This is from Andrew Cadorna. Yes, for Joseph, what's the one thing that you're not willing to compromise when it comes to your work ethic?
Well, one thing that I'm not willing to compromise when it comes to my work ethic is what I believe the story needs. I remember one instance when I think I ultimately gave the subject a difficult time because I felt that the story had greater importance than her. This was one shoot I did for Esquire Philippines, where my subject was Mocha Uson, who still, I don't even know if she still works with the government now. But back then, the story was that Esquire was doing a good guy versus bad guy special. They had originally planned a 2-cover issue, and they had photographed Lenny. I believe that was you, Paco. You photographed Lenny for them.
Yeah.
And I was given the assignment to shoot Mocha. So while we were shooting, I realized that the images that I was creating was showing her as a freedom fighter, because I, like her, I can lie. And what was
Sorry, no,
interesting
wait,
was,
let me correct. It's not just you though, but I think one thing is that the image can lie because the image can be interpreted a million different ways.
absolutely.
It's not that the purpose of the image is to lie. It's
Mhm.
just it's always been open to interpretation,
Right,
right,
right.
Joseph?
Yes.
How does
So,
ethics come into that then?
well, I figured that my personal code of ethics, which was I've been very um, I've spoken out about certain things that the current administration has been doing incorrectly. I felt that my personal code of ethics would not let her walk out of that shoot without me photographing her the way I believed she was, which was that until now, I believe that she is part of an apparatus of lies and propaganda. So during that shoot, I ruined the background behind her, put some tape on it, and made her hold the tape. And I felt that visual would more clearly speak to who she was. And I submitted that photo. Um, I don't remember which ones ran, but for me, my job then was to use the very fleeting power I had over someone who had a lot of influence and see what image I could take that other people could see. I remember someone in this panel a while ago saying that images have no language to them, that you can look at an image and fully understand it instantly. And I knew that as a photographer, there are just certain moments where you're given access to people that you'll never have access to again. So you have a very short period of time to say something very important that other people will understand instantly when they see it. So I took that opportunity and ran with it. I think that's what I won't let go of ever. As a photographer, you are given certain opportunities to say something. I believe Aloysa does this every single day, which is why I'm
Yeah.
so amazed with photojournalists, especially now. But in my case, then I saw someone who was not as important as the story I had about her, and I'm glad that happened. I'm also glad that she wasn't on the cover.
But let me again. You're being a little bit too humble because that sort of bravery, the bravery of the creative decision in the split second behind the camera, that takes a very brave person, a very brave artist to do something like that, right? To decide to create an image that isn't flat, that isn't neutral, that isn't boring, an image that's trying to say something. And ultimately, though, as a photographer, you have to accept that some people will agree with you and some people will disagree with you. And that's just, you can't please everybody, right? And Joseph is slogan. But hold on, we're getting a lot of questions here. There's another one here for it's for Eloisa. It's from Julian Paulo Garces. But I'm gonna throw this open to everybody because I think the photojournalist, the gallerist, the portraitist, and the photo editor will all have different answers. And the question is, let's start with Eloisa. When photographing the less privileged, are photographers required to give some sort of compensation to the subject? Now, it's a very well phrased question because it's not monetary compensation, it's compensation. Eloisa, you want to tackle this one?
Sure. No, we're not required. And no, I don't give any sort of compensation to any of my subjects, whether they're less privileged, whether they're privileged, anyone at all. And I think you would actually be surprised to know that there are a lot of generous, very willing people. Once you just start a conversation, and I really don't think it's even, you should even think about like compensation part. If you're thinking about getting access, if that's what the purpose of the question was, because actually once you start talking to people, once you start getting to know them, a lot of people are very willing, and a lot of people are very generous to share their stories and very generous to let you in their homes. Maybe not now, but yeah, in a normal situation, yeah. I don't
Sonny?
barely have to think about it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Eliza. Sonny,
No, that's
can I
fine.
ask you this question? Because this comes up a lot with travel photography specifically, where, oh, you're traveling, you're somewhere, you see a fisherman. Should you pay them for taking their picture, or should you just ask permission? Should you just take the picture and not ask or give anything? What's your stand on this, Sonny?
I think this is just one like giant gray area. But in my personal belief, more than compensation, I think what we owe anyone that we photograph is a little bit of respect and empathy. Just slowing down and being able to relate with people and actually have a conversation with them rather than stealing a photograph. I mean, if anyone's uncomfortable with you photographing them, they will mention it. And people can be, like either they're very vocal about it or, with their body language, they just say no. That's something you have to, and something you have to respect. I feel we fall into that trap when we go into, communities that we're not familiar with, where we feel that we may have to compensate monetarily. It's really never about that. I think a lot of them don't even expect that. They just want a bit of respect and a bit of empathy. Personally, like with the series I did in Masbate, I went there in 2012 and 2013. So in 2013, the very first thing I did, I didn't even take out my camera. I had brought prints that I had made from the previous year, and I looked for people, and I went down. I think there was easily like about 100 people that photographed individually against a blank wall. Yeah, I just looked for each and every one of them, and then I gave them a copy of the image, and that was, I think to them that's more than enough, and they felt almost dignified that like, hey, someone actually took their time to get to know me and take my portrait. So that above anything else, really.
Gio, in the gallery world, for example, and this is still to the question about compensation to your subjects. When you are out and you're photographing, let's say in a non-studio environment, you're traveling and you see this great image on a mountaintop and there's someone walking there. Do you ask for model release? Do you pay them? If it ends up being a fine art print that sells at a gallery, what's the official line that you take?
Well, I guess there's really no official line. I guess to each photographer, to each artist, they have their own code of conduct. As Joseph and Sonny mentioned, and listening to the answers of Eloisa and Sonny, I feel the same way. I think a lot of it also has to do with intention. And as a photographer, you meet somebody and you go into a situation. And, as Sonny mentioned, you have to be respectful and empathetic. And you can't forget that you're dealing with just, with another human being, regardless of who that is and regardless of the images you're taking. And, there has to be that sense of respect and that sense of consent to a degree. And I think sometimes that means not taking the image or not, or not making that print or not, selling an image. It's hard to speak on this, but in the gallery context, I guess it's something that we think about a lot as well. Where do these images come from? Who are in these images, if there are people, and what are the implications if there's a print of this selling on the wall? And it's something that we take very seriously. And when we meet with photographers and see their work, it's a lot of times it's also a long process of asking questions. Like, what is this project about? Where did you get these images? Who are these people? And we just wanted to know and have some more context in terms of how these images were being made. And I'm happy to say that many people that we talk to are very respectful and very gracious people. And these photographers are people who are who really care about the people they photograph and care about the communities they photograph, and are also very aware of the implications of what it means to print an image and hang it on a wall that may or may not be purchased for a sum of money by somebody else. So I think, it's something we take very seriously. It's something that is always on our minds, and I think is also, yeah, that's it.
Joseph, I guess, sorry to put you last on this question, but I actually wanted to save you for last because you're working in an environment where that celebrity or that model has been paid thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands or millions of pesos to do just that, to stand in front of your camera. Has it taken over too much? I mean, you can't drive down EDSA, not that you're supposed to drive down EDSA during quarantine, without looking at these celebrities' faces. And this is purely paid, stand in front of the camera and look pretty photography. Where do you think we are with that purely commercial exchange between photographer and subject?
I think when it comes to commercial photography, well, number one, the artistic part for me at least is set aside, and so it really becomes about the value of not just of the photo, but of whatever product is being sold. I'm not actually so sure about that as well, but all I can think of right now is that there are different arrangements in photography. And when it comes to commercial work, the arrangement is really just about it benefiting a story that's being told about a product that has to be sold as well. As a photographer, I mean, no disrespect, but I step out creatively because I realize that my job there is to serve something else. And I will do that. I will come in with my assistant, and we will light it and we will direct it and we will serve the reason that we're there. But that's not for us. It's part of us. It's us being part of a team again. So
okay,
yeah,
it's a much more straightforward exchange. Now, one of the things about the global lockdown is that where before I'm one of the guilty parties here, photographers would fly around the world, we'd do our shoots, we'd fly in, we'd fly out, and it would happen here. Photographers would come in, shoot their stories, and then go home, wherever that might be. But now, photo desks, photo editors, production houses are having to hire local photographers because we're not able to travel. And I'm seeing a lot more bylines from local Pinoy photographers in global publications, right? Which I think is a good thing. Eloisa being one of them, Sonny, Joseph. And this is a question being asked by VJ Villafranca. Is there an Asian eye or an Asian perspective now that it's us locals photographing our own country? Is it different from a Western gaze? This question goes to Eloisa first.
I think, like what I was saying earlier about photographing something that's unique to the Filipino experience, that's as far as I could think of a local perspective or an Asian eye. I can't speak for Asian eye, maybe Filipino eye, but I would also have to admit that my knowledge of photography is a lot influenced by Western photographers. I mean, growing up, like in high school or no, in college, like photography classes would often talk about like the Western masters, Sebastião Salgado, James Natway. So I think a lot of my photography, and I think a lot of Filipino photographers also took inspiration from them. So I'm not so sure about whether we have a very specific style or a very specific perspective. All I can say is that we do have specific, unique things to photograph locally. And sometimes I think it's even more unique when a local photographs these stories because there's that certain connection. But then again, we always go back to the fact that sometimes foreigners do have a special privilege when they come here, where many Filipinos could easily open their houses to them. There's always that, Filipinos are hospitable and would always give foreigners a smile and would always give them an extra hand, or just be more open to them sometimes. So yeah, I'm not so sure about it, but I think we're trying to get there. I think we're trying to build that slowly, but I think it's moving forward, especially now that a lot of us can travel. A lot of photographers can travel, and outlets are stuck with us.
Okay, I'm gonna continue with this question from VJ Villafranca, who's probably one of the more important documentary photographers who's really put Philippine photography on the forefront. Credit where credit is due. Gio, I'm gonna extend this question and say, when someone submits work to you to consider for the gallery, can you tell that they're Asian or not? Because, and if I may very quickly, we don't create photographs in a vacuum. A lot of our cultural references come into our photography. One example I'd like to say is for photographers who don't write in the Western alphabet, for example, Korean, Chinese, or Japanese, where it's a vertical writing system and it's right to left. I think somehow that influences their sense of composition. Do you see that at all, or is this just me talking out of my?
Well, all the photographers that normally submit are Filipino, but not all of them live in the Philippines. So it is interesting to see, Filipinos who have that background of being from here, but are currently living in a different place, and how that influences how they shoot. I guess that's more a result of them responding to the environment that they're in more than anything. I've never been in a place where I've seen a work and I'm like, oh, that's Asian or that's Western. But I do see that maybe there are certain tendencies based on the consumption of images and where a person is and how they respond to the stimulus around them. Okay. And yeah, I guess it is quite interesting when you say, like, I guess not just compositionally speaking, how people compose, but also how they construct their narratives or their stories for projects. Because I guess something I've noticed is a lot of projects are more on the linear side in terms of how a narrative progresses. But seeing work from Japan, seeing work from the Middle East, seeing work from India, the work doesn't kind of feel like it's going from left to right. It kind of picks at different places and becomes a whole. So, I guess when you're talking about language or visual language and how people express themselves through images, maybe the circumstances that they grew up in, whether that's how they speak with their voice, also applies to how they speak with images. Right,
that's a good point. The influences of daily life on what we decide to put in front of our cameras, right? Let me just step back for a second here to acknowledge that Christine Fonachier, who's one of the co-founders of Grid and is our editor at large, her shadow looms large on Grid as far as creating the idea of who we are and what we do. And she pointed something out that I should address, and that even with personal work, photographers don't work in a vacuum. So earlier I said that Joseph Pasquale had a very brave decision to photograph his subject in a certain way. You didn't do that in a vacuum. You had stylists, makeup artists, editors-in-chief, photo editors, all helping you create that image. And I think that goes the same for Eloisa. I mean,
sure.
You're alone in the field, but you have a whole team at Reuters helping you create that image from start to finish, right? So I just wanted to acknowledge that. It's not a question. And the producers here are asking me to keep moving because we got a lot of questions. And here's one for Eloisa, but for everybody. And I'm going to go backwards here. I'm going to start with Joseph. Joseph, what do you shoot when you aren't on assignment?
Nothing.
Okay, that was perfect. Sonny Thakur.
I wish I shot something, but no. I wait for assignments. That's how I work.
All right. Okay.
It's so good.
Sonny Thakur, what are you shooting when you're not on assignment?
I shoot food. I shoot stuff I cook. I shoot the stuff my mom cooks. Yeah, just food, really.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. Gio, what are you shooting where you're not shooting an assignment or even a self-assigned assignment?
Nothing. I just look at a lot of work, I guess, when I'm not shooting as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Eloise especially, what are you shooting when you don't have the Reuters press pass around your neck and you're not officially on duty?
Honestly, when I'm at home, I'm basically just chasing the light in my apartment because the light here comes in really nicely, especially in sunset. And sometimes it hits really beautifully on my plants, so I photograph that. Or food also, like Sonny. So yeah, it's just constantly chasing light wherever I am. When I see a nice light, I photograph it, Instagram it, stuff like that.
All right. Again, the producers. And speaking of acknowledgement, I'd just like to acknowledge the whole team that's behind this broadcast right now, from our interns, our team at Grid, the digital team. Pierre has been the magician behind this whole thing to make it work. I still don't know how this works, but it works. So thank you to the whole team behind us. And speaking of the team, the producer is saying second to the last question. This is sort of a red flag that we're taking too long to answer everything. From Tish Valias, I know her. She's my sister-in-law. So this is going to be a tough one. To the panel, what underrepresented stories do you wish Filipino audiences would have more interest in? Any takers? There's a second part to it. What about the groups, companies who support photography as a craft and essential communication medium? I guess what she's saying here is, if I may rephrase your question, Tish, is that crossover, because we're seeing a lot of based on a true story advertising campaigns. And how do you feel about that? Shouldn't we just be telling the story? Shouldn't we just be interviewing or photographing or documenting the real thing happening, and sharing that? To anybody in the panel, this is a challenging one. Thank you, Tish.
I'm not sure about the second half of the question. Like what about the groups or companies who support photography as a craft and essential communication medium? But the underrepresented stories I feel that need more attention are stories about food security. You know, like we're an agricultural nation, but we import a lot of the food that we consume, and that's just been the way it's been for the longest time. I think that deserves a lot more attention. There have been really big brands and big companies trying to focus on the micro of things, where like some large coffee companies will zoom in on one of their farmers and do a little advertising campaign about them. I don't really know what that does, or if it gets the word out there. So I'm gonna throw that back to you, Paco, because like you've shot a lot of like advertising, and I'm sure there's a bunch of clients who have asked for, real life stories to be portrayed, but for like the commercial view.
Is that a question for me, Sonny?
Yes, that is a question for you. Because
I find that I'm doing more and more work, what we call here, CSR, corporate social responsibility, departments within large corporations. You have to pick and choose. Some corporations do greenwash, where the CSR is just an exercise in PR. But there are a lot of companies, especially here in the Philippines, where we've seen the private sector really pick up the slack, from all the way back from the Yolanda disaster, where private corporations really stepped in to help, all the way now to the COVID crisis, where private corporations are really trying to help as much as possible. I find myself drawn to those stories, where this large corporation is doing good publicly, and I'm trying my little bit to try and help share those stories as truthfully and authentically as possible, to use two very complicated terms we discussed earlier. But last question here, and this is from Sandy. And this is a good question to end with, actually, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. Where do you find mentorship? Portfolio reviews are great for meeting and touching base with photographers in the industry, but how else is everyone able to find and form sustainable relationships with people you can learn from? Eloisa.
For me, it's mostly my closest friends in the industry. One of my closest friends is Hannah Reyes Morales. And honestly, just talking to her sometimes, I learn a lot from that. Or just seeing whatever she's photographing, that inspires me. I'm also lucky because most of the time, when I'm photographing outside, I'm with a group of other photographers. So sometimes I file end of the day and I would also see their photos and I would see, oh, they did it this way. Oh, this is how he photographed it. And that's kind of mentorship, even if it's not directly mentorship, but just seeing how they're working within the same space that I was in, that I really learn a lot from that. So yeah, even if it's not really a direct mentorship relationship, I learn a lot by just observing my colleagues and just seeing whatever they're working on.
Just very quickly, where do you find mentorship?
What's interesting is, for me, every relationship starts after the work is done. So during work, you're there with a very specific purpose to get to do something, to finish it, to say it's a wrap. But after that shoot wraps, then you start forming relationships with the people you've been with there. And I believe that it's really in casual conversation that anything starts being built. I myself am very nervous about the idea of mentorship because I always never feel like I'm ready to ask someone for help as well with regards to how I work. And instead of looking upwards, quote unquote, in terms of someone who's further ahead than me, that's another strange way to describe things. I always instead try to look laterally instead. And I believe that once you start looking at the friends you've made within the work that you've done together, that's an easier way to get that sort of to start learning without having to think more actively about mentorship, I guess. Yeah,
as a formal thing. Before I move on to Gio here, I just want to remind everybody that please this is the last question we have time for, but keep asking your questions. We'll try and answer them on the Facebook comments section. But actually, our editor-in-chief, Nina Elias, just chimed in, and she's finding so many of the answers so interesting that we might either make a podcast out of your questions that we weren't able to answer, or do an article or a post about it. And we'll try and get through as many of them as possible. But again, back to the last question. Gio, where do you find your mentorship?
For me, it really comes in finding people who I trust, and finding people who I'm comfortable showing work to or comfortable asking questions. Because I do feel the same way as Joseph, where sometimes I have a hard time asking people about advice or asking people for questions and kind of opening myself up in that way. And so I've really found mentorship in my closest friends, in the same way that Joseph looks laterally. I think that's kind of more akin to how I approach it as well. I think learning by observation is very important for me, and working with many different people, I think is very helpful. Seeing how different people work, seeing how they approach certain situations, and this comes both equally on the photography side and also for more of the video projects that I do with Tarsier. It's seeing how different people approach different situations and what the process is, and how it, if there's certain things I can learn from their process that I can apply to my process, and how, it's just a constant kind of trying to improve with each shoot, with each subject, with each project, trying to find better ways to do things that you're doing, and trying to express yourself in a clearer way as well.
Sonny, Thakur, where do you find your mentorship?
Very similar to both Gio and Joseph. I look laterally as well. So a lot of my friends, when I'm unsure about things, I run it by them. I run it by you sometimes. But also really believe in like the goodness of people and how that there are a lot of people out there that are willing to share information for free. And sometimes all it takes is an email. And I remember like one of the best experiences of my life was my internship with Chris Buck in 2015. That was 3 years of email exchanges of him being unsure to take on an intern from the Philippines. And it was just back and forth for 3 years, and I finally convinced him. And it was a really solid like 4.5 months working on set in a different country with a very different set of standards and rules. And this was on the commercial and editorial side, but a lot of it kind of like spilled over into the personal side as well. And I feel a good place to start is just look for people that you want to be like, or people that produce work that you really enjoy looking at. And it doesn't hurt to just send out an email to them. And more often than not, you'll be surprised. They actually get back to you, and you forge relationships that last for a really long time.
Fantastic. If I may step in, mentorship has been the core idea of why we started Open Call 5 years ago, is to start these conversations, to put as many old, like myself, starting little experienced photographers in the same space as possible, and start getting them talking. And I think I'm glad to see that alumni from the past 5 Open Calls have either ended up shooting for Grid or have gone on to become, incredible photographers in their own right. So I'd like to thank our mentors today, Eloisa Lopez, Joseph Pasquale with his very nice buzz cut today, Gio Panlillo, and of course Sonny Thakur, our photo editor, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed being here as much as we've enjoyed having you. The comments section on Facebook is quite an interesting read. If you want to just scroll down and have a read of that, you can have a laugh this Saturday evening. But especially, I'd also like to thank our production team, which is our interns, our staff at Grid, for putting the Open Call dialogues together. Again, if you'd like to join the portfolio review, a one-on-one session, a chance to speak one-on-one with some of the mentors that were here today to present your work, please do check out the Facebook page, and we'll be posting a link where you can submit your work. This has been the Open Call Dialogues presented by Grid Magazine and Eastern Communications. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember travel? We do. We remember the many amazing places we've seen in our journeys throughout this great country. But more unforgettable were the people that we met. The runners who bring resources to the most remote mountain villages. The marine scientists who guard our seas. Farmers who toil so that the rest of us will have food to eat. Sailors who travel to the Philippines, thousands of islands, so that no one is left behind. We've met artists and scientists, builders and businessmen, advocates and activists, characters and storytellers. They were all working to build a future and to build this country. As travelers, we were also doing our part in keeping people and communities going. We haven't traveled for a while, and we feel its absence. We all feel it. Without travel, we've lost a way to connect. But we've realized travel was never a luxury. We remember travel. It brought resources, progress, knowledge, hope. Travel drives economies, fires up imaginations, and brings dreams that will become the realities of the future. And travel will help us rebuild. We will travel again.